Today we're taking a look at the best settings for the Modern Warfare 2 campaign that has just dropped on all platforms for pre-order users. These PC settings will be boosting your FPS to its max, and because it's a campaign, we're also going to be making sure that we maintain some of those immersive, nice graphics options, unlike what we would do for a multiplayer settings video. So let's jump straight into it. We're starting off in the display areas. Today, I said we're focusing on graphics. For display mode, full screen borderless or full screen exclusive are the two best options here. Some people will find no difference between running full screen borderless and full screen exclusive in terms of FPS and input lag. In general, full screen exclusive should make the game feel better, but with modern games, full screen borderless actually seems to run just as well as full screen exclusive, and it means you can alt tab in and out quickly if you need to. So I tend to run at full screen borderless. This one also works. Next up, display monitor. Just make sure this is set to the correct monitor. You'll know because the game will be on the correct monitor. Don't need to dwell on this. Display adapter. You'll likely only have one thing set here. For me, it's my RTX 3070. If you happen to have multiple GPUs for whatever reason, or you've got an integrated graphics card as well as your dedicated graphics card, just make sure you've got the correct thing set here. Otherwise, you might run into some problems. For screen refresh rate and display resolution, they are locked for me because I've got full screen borderless set. If you have full screen exclusive set, then they become available, and in which case you then just need to make sure that your screen refresh rate is either set to auto, or you can select the exact refresh rate of your monitor, which for me is 240 Hz. For you, it might be 60 Hz, hopefully not, more likely 144 Hz. Just make sure it's set correctly, but auto should do it for you. And then display resolution, just set this to the native resolution of your monitor. For me, that's 1920 by 1080 or 1080p. Dynamic resolution, not something that I would recommend turning on. There's much better ways to gain FPS if you really need to, rather than turn this on, so I would leave this at off. Aspect ratio, you want to make sure this is just set to automatic. For me, automatic defaults to a wide 16:9 resolution. In general, auto should handle it. If you notice that your aspect ratio is weird on your screen, you've got black bars or stuff like that, then maybe come in here and just set it to exactly what you need to, but auto should work in general. VSync. Turn this off for both gameplay and menus. It does introduce input lag and doesn't really help out in any way other than causing a bit less screen tearing, but there's better ways to avoid screen tearing than VSync, so just leave that off. Custom frame rate limit. Leave this at custom, go to show more, and then turn gameplay custom frame rate limit to the max, which is 300. Menu custom frame rate limit, I'd recommend you keep this at something like 100. Keeps your menus running smooth. You don't want to turn it too low, otherwise it feels kind of horrid, but you also don't want it too high because it just uses up system resource for no point. And then lastly, out of focus custom frame rate limit. You just want to set this pretty low, i.e. leave it at 30. Just means that whenever we alt tab out the game, we will actually have lower frame rate of the game running in the background, uses up less system resource, and that makes sense because we're alt tabbed. We don't need it running at high FPS. Okay, next, restart shaders optimization. I always say it's about COD games. If you're having any problems, come here, click this, and it can resolve a lot of stuttering, weird problems that you get in the game. But in general, when you've just installed the game, you shouldn't have to worry about doing a shader optimization restart because you'll have just installed the shaders when you've done the initial install. That makes sense. Display gamma. This is basically dependent on whether you've got a monitor or a TV. If you're playing on a monitor, like I and many other PC players are, leave this at 2.2. If you're playing on a TV, you've got your PC linked up to a big TV, use 2.4 and you get better display gamma. Brightness, I always recommend that you turn this up a little bit. It will be set to 50 by default. Turn that up a little bit to 55. It always makes the brightness of the game just a bit better, makes some of those colors pop a little bit more as well, and also makes it a little bit easier to see some of those annoying AI enemies in the campaign missions, especially in some of those really dark ones. Constrain mouse to game window and focused mode. These are personal preference things. I just recommend that you keep them off. There's no real need to turn them on. Your mouse should be fairly constrained when you're playing anyway. In the menu, I can go off because I'm not on full screen exclusive, but that's no problem to me anyway. It's good that I can go to my other monitor. And then focused mode is where it actually puts a black overlay on your other monitor. If anything, to me, this sounds like it's going to be using up more system resource to actually be able to do that, so I definitely want to keep that off. And then lastly, high dynamic range. This is going to be a bit of a contested one, depending on if you've got a HDR display or not. Main thing is, if you don't have a HDR display, actually set this to off rather than automatic, so it's not trying to do some sort of HDR without you choosing to. So make sure you keep that off if you don't have HDR monitor. If you have a HDR monitor, then feel free to turn this on and play around with it. I don't have a HDR monitor, so I don't have the info on that for you guys. It might be a helpful thing to have for campaign to make it look a bit better. When it comes to multiplayer, we definitely want this off, but yeah, campaign it might be a good thing. I can't give too much info on that. Next up, quality. We apply the settings here. Quality presets, we just leave this at custom because it's going to get set by everything we set down here anyway. Render resolution, make sure that's 100. That means that you're rendering out at the same render resolution as your native resolution of your monitor. This is something we can come and turn down a little bit, maybe to 90, or probably the lowest you want to go is 80 if you have real problems with FPS for whatever reason. That can be a good way to gain some back. Upscaling / sharpening, you've got a couple of different things here. We've got things like Nvidia DLSS, we've got Nvidia image scaling, FSR. These are all different ways that you can apply some sort of upscaling or sharpening. And you've got a couple of different options here. I'd say if you're having an absolute fine time in terms of FPS and you just want the game to look as good as possible, choose Fidelity FX CAS and then come in here and set Fidelity FX CAS strength to 75. This is going to be a bit of a personal preference, but this actually applies a really nice sharpen filter on the game, really sharpens up the visuals, and makes the campaign missions look really, really nice. If you're having problems with FPS, then you can use something like DLSS, which enables you to come in here, set a Nvidia DLSS preset. This is obviously only if you've got an Nvidia DLSS enabled card. And then I would recommend you likely don't go below quality. If you're starting to try and use balanced performance or ultra performance, the game looks really blurry and it just doesn't look very nice. So I'd recommend quality with an Nvidia DLSS sharpness of 90. That works nicely if you just want to gain some FPS back if you're having some struggles. But to be honest, if you're running the game with a DLSS enabled card, you don't need it. And then the other one you can select, which is another useful one, is AMD FSR. This is kind of similar to DLSS, so once again, it's if you want to gain some FPS, come in here and run this at quality or ultra quality. They're both pretty good. They both run pretty similar, and these have similar effects to DLSS. For me, I will set this to CAS because I don't have problems with FPS in the game, and I just want the game to look as crisp as possible. Okay, off of that sidetrack now, back onto the settings. Anti-aliasing. We've only got SMAA T2X and Filmic SMAA T2X as options here. Just set it to the non-Filmic one. It's the less blurry looking one. It looks better overall. It's annoying we can't turn off anti-aliasing, but that's what we have to deal with. Anti-aliasing quality, I would turn this to normal. In multiplayer, I would usually say you put it on low, but in the campaign, you can get away with having it turned up just a little bit to just make that anti-aliasing look a bit better, a bit less jagged. Video memory scale, I would recommend you turn this all the way to the right. And then if you have any problems with VRAM usage, i.e. basically the amount of memory on your GPU, you can come in here, turn this down to maybe 80, not 85, and then see if that improves things. But for most people, you should be able to shove this on 90, get a little bit more performance, push a GPU to its max, and that works out fine. Next, in details and textures. Texture resolution, texture filter, anisotropic, and nearby level of detail. I'd recommend you keep these all on high. These are all actually, well, texture resolution specifically, is actually very, very much dependent on your amount of VRAM. If you've got a decently beefy GPU, then you can definitely leave this on high, because as you can see now, I'm nowhere near my max VRAM, and therefore texture resolution will have no effect for me. If you find that by turning this up to high, you're pushing your VRAM way near its max, then you might need to bring it down to low or normal and try that out. But for most people, it's not actually an FPS hog, it's just a VRAM hog that can cause some FPS problems if you reach near the max. For texture filter, anisotropic, and nearby level of detail, just leave those both on high. They both use very little VRAM to have on high, and they lower the FPS very minuscule to even you barely even notice the FPS going down, and it will give you a much better amount of visibility in the game. It makes the game look so much better. Distant level of detail, I've kept this on low for most of the campaign levels. A lot of things are quite near to you anyway, and you don't really need that really high level of distant level of detail. Sorry, I can't even get the words out. So it's just a bit of a waste of resource. If you start to find on certain levels with longer sight lines and you start to notice any kind of weird pop-in or weird problems with the level of detail, then you can turn this up to high for that level and then bring it back down to low for the more close quarters areas. Clutter draw distance, I've kept this on short just so we don't have a load of small ground elements clogging up the screen. Things like ground foliage, rocks, and various decals or decals, I don't know how you pronounce that. There's just no need to have this higher than short. Once again, it's a similar thing to distant level of detail. If you really start to see any problems with having this on short on those bigger maps, then you can turn it up to long to make you feel more immersed, but in general, short just works out fine. Particle quality and particle quality level, I recommend you keep these both on high. They both have fairly little effect on FPS, and if anything, particle quality on high has been known to improve FPS, even though it says that it has a medium effect on GPU. No one seems to know why still, but it's just the fact of the matter. So I'd recommend you keep these both on high for that immersion and potentially an FPS increase for whatever reason. Bullets, impacts, and sprays, I definitely keep these on in the campaign. In multiplayer, sometimes I say you might want to turn them off because they can be a bit of a visual annoyance, but in campaign, you want to see bullet holes, you want to be immersed, so definitely keep those on. Shader quality, low. This is just something which can affect FPS, and it doesn't really show any improvement having this above low from my perspective, so just keep it on low. Shader optimization, that's just something which allows you to learn more about the shader optimization process. Not very important. Tessellation, this is going to be one which is kind of dependent on your setup. If you've got a decently strong setup, I would recommend keeping tessellation on near for the campaign, because tessellation is a really nice addition in terms of how the geometry of things like the ground look. You can see over here, it actually makes it feel a lot more immersive in the environments you're in. If you're having struggles with FPS, then I'd say this is one of the first things to come in and put straight to off, just to gain back some of that performance. But for us out here with a decent CPU and GPU combo, yeah, we're gonna keep it on near. I wouldn't put it on all, no real need. You don't really notice the tessellation beyond near distances anyway. Terrain memory, I would leave this at max. On-demand texture streaming, off. This is something we definitely don't want on, where it's trying to download textures and stuff while you're playing. I still don't understand why they keep this in the game. Not a good thing you want to be running, for sure. Streaming quality, low. Volumetric quality, low. And deferred physics quality, low. These are all very much just extras in the graphic settings. These are all very superfluous. They're very extra. We don't need these high. Volumetric quality especially can cause some real hitches in FPS, because it's really determining how lighting and fog and clouds work. And having it on low, it still looks good, which is the weird thing. A lot of these settings, you put them on low, it still looks good, but you're just getting better FPS. And it's the same for streaming quality and for deferred physics quality as well. Water caustics, I've left these on. It says water caustics are the light rays and light waves that light produces at the bottom of the ocean. I don't know how many levels we're going to get where we're going to see this kind of stuff, but I've left it on for now because it sounds good. It might have an effect on FPS. Who knows? We'll find out, I guess. Shadow map resolution. We're getting through this quickly, guys. Shadow map resolution. Leave this at normal. I wouldn't go below normal unless you really are struggling for FPS, because normal is essentially the best looking shadows you can get. When you start going to high, extra, or ultra, you really don't see that much improvement in the shadows, apart from a little bit of sharpness here and there. Whereas the difference between normal, low, and very low is quite big, and it can have more effect on FPS. So this is going to be one where it's a balance of how good you want your game to look in the campaign versus how much FPS you're happy to lose. I've personally found that normal works out great for me, and that's where I'd recommend you start, and then you maybe come in here and put it to low, or very low if you have to, but don't go above normal at all. Screen space shadows, low. Spot shadow quality, low. Cache spot shadows and cache sun shadows, these two, make sure these are both on, with spot cache at high. This is a very, very useful little set of settings where if you've got, a decent amount of RAM, I'd probably say 16 gig or above, you're going to see definitely better results from having these set, as I've just said, on, high, and on. If you've got less than 16 gigabytes of RAM, you're running 8 gigs, which really isn't enough for solid high-performance gaming in 2022 anyway, then you might have to turn these off, and you might then see better FPS. But for most people out there with decent systems, I'm talking about, above medium, you can run this as this, and it actually helps out a lot. Particle lighting, normal. Ambient occlusion, off. And then open up ambient occlusion and just make sure, actually, if we just, I've seen that this apparently is a thing where if you set it to a setting, come in here, turn it to low, then turn it off, it just makes sure that quality is definitely set to low. It might be a placebo thing, but I would just do that anyway to ensure that this setting before it gets locked is set at its lowest setting. Screen space reflections, I've left these at normal because they do help in the campaign to make things a bit more immersive, some of those reflections, and it has minimal effect in terms of FPS. It would be something I'd turn off for multiplayer, but for campaign we can leave it on. And then weather grid volumes, I've left this at on and ultra quality. It says the weather grid volumes collect weather effects from the environment and apply them to dynamic objects. To me, I don't really know the ins and outs of this. I haven't done big benchmarks on this, but it sounds once again like something which is quite interesting to have on and is very unlikely to actually have any effect in terms of FPS, more likely to have effect in terms of visibility, so probably a setting where you want it on for campaign and you want it off for multiplayer. Lastly, coming down into the post-processing effects. Nvidia Reflex Low Latency. Simple case here is you want this either on or on plus boost. Which one, you say? Well, look at your system, look at your CPU, look at your GPU. If you have a really strong GPU in comparison to your CPU, so you're in a CPU bound case, then put it at on plus boost and you'll probably get better performance. If you're in a situation where your GPU and your CPU are on par, which is basically the situation I'm in, I've got a very strong version of both, a CPU and a GPU, then on is the better option. If what I've just said makes no sense and you don't know, just try out on and try out on plus boost. Do a couple of literally like 1 minute benchmarks with an FPS counter on and see which one looks better, feels better, has better FPS. You can find out for yourselves. There's not a simple case where on plus boost is the better option. It's not how it works. For me, on works better than on plus boost. Depth of field, world motion blur, and weapon motion blur, all of these off. They are all settings which some people might like them, I guess, in the campaign, but I feel like they are all horrible settings in any game, so I would recommend you turn them off, and you'll hopefully agree with me on that. And then lastly, film grain. We may as well have bundled that in with turning all these off. Film grain is also terrible, so yeah, keep that off. And then lastly, let's go into view, which is the last area of the graphics. Field of view, turn that all the way to 120. For the campaign, you really should be doing that. I've said in the past that by turning this down, you can gain some FPS. That is true, but for the campaign, you want to be taking in as much as possible. Really enjoy it for yourself. If you want to gain FPS, go follow some of the stuff I've said previous in the video. You know, turn down the render, render resolution or something like that. You don't need to turn down your FOV. Get that right up there. ADS field of view, I'd recommend you keep that at affected so that when you ADS with this high field of view, you maintain a high field of view and you don't go suddenly back into like 80 field of view, which feels horrible. And then weapon field of view and vehicle field of view, I'd recommend you just leave these at default. I've tried playing around with the narrow and wide. I did this in the Modern Warfare 2 beta as well, and I didn't like how it looked. This is sort of a personal preference thing, but default is how COD usually looks, so I'd recommend not playing around with it. And in camera, first person and third person movement, I've put these to least because I'm not a massive fan of the intense camera shakes, even in campaign. So I've put you can set these both to least here and it will limit that amount so you can maintain that decent amount of visibility when you're trying to shoot some of those enemies in the campaign missions. Whew, and there we go, guys. That is all the settings. There is a lot of settings in this game. I will be doing an updated version of this when the multiplayer releases next week, straight away when it releases. It releases very, very early in the UK, so it's going to be an interesting one. But hopefully these settings have set you up for a good time in the campaign. It's awesome we've got it a week early. If you want to leave your thoughts on the campaign and tell me what your favourite mission after you complete the whole thing is, then leave it down below. We can have a discussion about it. I am very, very excited to jump into more of this campaign. It seems really, really awesome, and Modern Warfare's never done us wrong with good campaigns. So thank you very much for watching, guys. I will catch you guys in my next video. Bye bye.